What we thought we'd do is do a little talking here. Hopefully you guys will have questions too. And sort of, to be honest with you, sort of about anything, anywhere you guys want to go. So we can answer your questions and get into all that. We thought we'd do the questions. Maybe we do a little part of talk on starts. Obviously, that's critical, so we'll hit on that. And then we'll take a break. And every time we do this, we say, oh, yeah, let's do some individual check out your boat time. And we'll do it this time. We'll take a break, and those people that want us to take a look at your boat, we could check your tuning if you had questions about that, or we could look at your rigging or your jib leads or whatever you guys would like. And then we'd come back and we could do, maybe the first weather leg and round in the top mark and get into some downwind stuff. But obviously, we're sensitive to, you can only talk so much before everybody's sound asleep. So we'll take these breaks so everybody can ask more personal questions about their boats, their questions, and we can check your boats out. But one thing I will say, I think Bill's boat out here that we use, were kind enough to let us use, Bill, is the best rig Scott I've ever seen. So, everything.
Hey, Bill, look at that camera. Got that camera, Bill. Skipper. Too bad a skipper don't match.
No, but there are a lot of things, from using light Spectra line. It's really not that expensive. It's light, it runs free. He has a safety. I don't know if you guys saw that for the outhaul. How many times we've been sailing and the outhaul breaks? And then somebody's got to go back and run the outhaul out to the boom, and it's only going to break when it's windy. So he's got a safety on there that's a really good idea. And the way he does it is great. Any safety is a good idea, though. But all that stuff is really well done. Obviously, the control thing for the Cunningham topping lift and vang is pretty jazzy. But I urge you to look at Bill's boat, and because it ain't going to get any better than that, for sure. So, but thanks for letting us use it there, Bill. Yeah. So, thanks, Bill. So the first thing, and Alan suggested, we just ask after the morning session, and we did get into some areas that maybe you'd say were a little more involved than I would have talked about in the past, and that was like dropping the jib downwind, While I think that is an advantage if we have a long leg and we have a chance to drop it, and then as Ryan pointed out, a chance to get it back up is the big part. I think it's cool, but in the whole scheme of things, you wouldn't want that to disrupt your tactics, your boat handling, your focus. But if you practice it and you're used to it, you're comfortable with it, it's a good thing to do. Okay, any questions on, I guess what I'm saying is, don't go out there if you're not comfortable with it and do it and then get to the bottom mark and not have your jib up. That'd be something we'd do. So any questions that you guys had that we talked about? We had a question just to kind of go over again what heating up means when we're talking downwind. And, we talked about there's a lot of style involved in sailing, and different people have different ways they do things, different ways they set their boat up. Some people don't like to use a Cunningham. Some people even don't like to weather sheet, which I find interesting on the Scott. But, the term heating up is kind of a new one over the past 10 years, and it's cool, and all it means is we're heading the boat up closer to the wind and kind of pouring the coals to it. How's that? We're going to build some more pressure and some more breeze. But where that comes in, if we're talking the teamwork between the trimmer and the driver, is if we're sailing, let's say, on a broad reach and it's light. Maybe there's enough wind to keep the chute filled. And let's face it, when we're going downwind, our goal is always to sail kind of as deep as we can, because that's the course closest to the mark. But if we sail too deep, the spinnaker starts to die. And when that happens, that's when we heat it back up a little bit and put the pressure on, get going fast, and then we take it back down again. So it's just like we talked about with changing gears upwind, it's up and down, downwind. But the communication between the trimmer and the driver become really important. And I think in a lot of ways, in that condition, the trimmer is driving the bus. They're going to tell you when you can head up and when you can, or when you have to head up and when you can bear off. And this takes practice because they got to get used to the feel on the sheet. But when you heat it up, when you head up and get power, more breeze in the spinnaker, you'll feel more of a tug. And when you feel that tug, they can say, I got pressure, and you can bear off. And you start driving the boat down a little bit, gently and slowly, ease the spinnaker out, pull the pole back until they say, that's it, that's as deep as you can go, I'm losing pressure. And then you can heat it back up a little bit, now I got pressure. Or you get a puff and they say, oh man, I got all kinds, you can take it way down. But that communication really makes it easier for the trimmer to keep the chute filled, okay? Because if they get deep and they start losing pressure and they can't keep the chute pressurized and filled, it's gonna collapse. Whereas when they start to lose it, they need to say, man, I can't, we need to go up. We got to heat it up a little bit, whatever, to put the pressure back on it, okay? What else, you guys? What else before we get into starting? Any questions? Ryan, you had some ideas. What else would you think we ought to touch on?
On spinnaker?
One thing you did point out, Ryan, is, a lot of times we're looking for a guide of like an angle of the jib batten to the center line, or the top batten on the main to the boom or to the center line. And while that can be a good starting point, what we're trying to get into there is what really matters, and that is the shape of the main and the changes, the sail shapes going through, so we can keep the power when we need it, we can depower when we need it, we know what the shape should look like, we can go through the gears. So I think that's what we're trying to say is these guides, when I first got into sail making, the buzzwords we all said was upper batten parallel to the boom. And I look back on that, and while that is a starting point, it's not even really close to getting us from light air, choppy conditions to heavy air, flat water. You know what I mean? It's just not. So that's why I sometimes we get off in a tangent and we get into details that really are pretty important. And when you get comfortable with those, then it makes it a lot easier to go through the gears. And that goes back, it's funny. I think I've said this every time we've been together in a clinic like this, but I was a director at the College of Charleston sailing program when I left sailmaking the first time. And, we had some incredible kids on our team. They were really good. One kid just got a bronze in the laser in the Olympics this last time. And we spent, I'm not exaggerating, 80% of our time speed testing. And this is in 420s and FJs that have like 3 wires and 2 sheets. But those were just a part of it. The whole big important part was the feel, the balance, the change in gears. And we decided that, when the races are literally 10 minutes long, there's no time to be smart with the shifts. You have to be the fastest boat out there. And they were, and it was cool. And that's what we worked on. So that's why I think it's really valuable to have a buddy to practice with and train with, And when I say train with, I mean just share information and do this testing, or if you will, sailing alongside each other. And then just say, hey, you're going a lot higher. Where do you have are your telltales flying on your jib, or whatever it is. And getting that speed part of it is really important. Yeah, Ron?
Lauren just prompted me about this question that I hadn't really given much thought to, but again, going downwind, could you address positioning the crew in the boat relative to light air, heavy air, this sort of thing?
Like you talked about balance, and we discussed it obviously on the upwind and like trying to keep the helm neutral, but when you're going downwind, what does that necessarily look like?
Well, and that's a really good point, Lauren, is the feel on the helm. When we go downwind, we're going to pull the board up. Let's say we pull the board up to where the wheels are maybe that far from the stanchions. They're pretty far up. So we're going dead downwind, broad reaching dead downwind. But like Ryan pointed out, the helm, especially downwind, has to be literally neutral. We're not trying to get any lift. We're not trying to make the boat point. The rudder just is to follow behind the boat. Anytime there's any feel on it, it's drag. So we want to position the heel such, this is windward leeward heel, so that the helm is neutral. Sometimes we talk about heeling the boat to weather, and that'll make the boat want to go deeper, sail deeper. And it's because the boat will develop lee helm and want to turn down. And there's a time for that if we really want to go deep. And that,
Would it be more advantageous for the skipper to fly the spinnaker and have the crew look backwards for the puffs?
it's funny you say that. That is, I have a really close friend who sailed with me and all kinds of stuff, sails a VX, and he is the crew. He likes to crew. He would give the spinnaker to the skipper, and he would turn around and call the shots. And he's a really good driver in his own right. But he said that just made it so much easier because in those boats, downwind is everything, and your air's got to be clean. But it would be just as advantageous in Scots and thistles and all that. So I think that's really valuable. And especially in a Scot, where the skipper's sitting there, the main sheet's right there, they could fly the chute. Maybe the trimmer could do the guy for them, and he could call for the trim, but the trimmer could be looking aft for puffs, for boats that are going to be on their breeze, and what the angle, and then they can turn around and look at the mark and get a good idea of their angle. I think that's a really good idea. But that takes some practice too to discuss what, and not only that, but what you're looking for from your trimmer. We need the breeze, and here's what the breeze looks like, and we want to know if boats are coming across the course and they're going to end up on top of our breeze before they're there. So I think it's just practice. I guess that's when I was telling a little story about our college guys. We practiced a lot with that, and this would take practice too, just getting everybody comfortable so they know exactly what you're asking of them.
So
Yeah.
that would put the crew in a position of being more strategic upwind and also downwind.
It'd be, yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
So they're really being the eyes on the race course, upwind and downwind.
exactly. And upwind, ideally, right, the driver's going to be driving and making the boat go as fast as he or she can. Maybe they're looking at puffs ahead, but they're also looking at the jib, they're looking at the main, they're feeling the tiller, and the crew is adjusting the jib maybe when they're asked for it, but they're always looking, they got their eyes out of the boat. I think that is ideal. Yeah. So,
Back to balance.
what's that?
Sorry, what were you saying about the balance of windward heel and stuff?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Lauren. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna apologize on it because he didn't answer my question.
Yeah. So everything's set right. We talked about the center seam. The pole is back just about, forward of perpendicular because it's not blowing 100. The vang is set so the telltale's flowing. Got the curl in the luff. Now the driver's going to be going for the feel on the tiller. And if we're just flat, chances are they're going to have a little bit of weather helm, which means if they let go of the tiller, the boat would gradually wind up into the wind. Okay? That's telling us it has a little bit of weather helm. If they step to weather, the crew, the driver sat to weather a little bit more, and we put a little bit of weather heel, which means the mast is to windward, the boom is up in the air, the spinnaker's over here. And it doesn't take much. They would do that until the helm is completely neutral. No feel at all.
So that goes to the idea of going to a performance area as opposed to an actual measured angle. Because unlike a lot of sailors, if they get maximum weather heel to get that main projected, basically this is gonna be guided by your helm feel, and you just get enough heel to keep it balanced, and that's
Right.
really what you're trying.
Right, because I think, if you go for a reason, projected area, boom up in the air, spinnaker out behind the main, whatever, to get that taken care of, but you have a ton of helm, which means, you got to keep pushing the tiller away to keep the boat going straight, especially with a Scot where we have just a hunk of metal, it's not going to be fast. Just think about it, all we're doing is we're holding a piece of metal going through the water sideways, so we want that to track right straight behind it.
And then outside of with the exception of when it's windy enough that we can get up on plane, where should we be as far as balancing between the crew and the skipper, between fore and aft?
It's interesting, Lauren, the Scot, for some reason, likes to have people in the back part of the boat. I think I've never quite understood that, except it's got a pretty,
Yeah, it's very counterintuitive to me.
pardon me?
That's counterintuitive to me.
Yes, except the Scot is rather bulbous in the front end, right? Is that the word to use? It's got a lot of area up there. So I think because the driver is going to be driving, got the main sheet, normally I think they would be right across from the main sheet cleat or the very back of the trunk in that little area. The trimmer, unless we're trying to do something with the heel or unless we're on a reach, would probably be sitting on the centerboard cap, and they'd have the guy in one hand and the sheet in the other. And that way, if the driver would say, I got a little bit of weather helm, now maybe they could scoot up and sit out a little bit more, sit up on the deck, or maybe the crew could just slide over and lean on the seat a little more. But that gives them the opportunity to move back and forth. And I think they would be right at the back of that slot, the centerboard slot. And this is in medium light air. Once we got to a condition where the boat's going to maybe consider planing, let's just say it's not going to be going 100 miles an hour, but it's going to start to plane, then I think the driver would slide back, and I think the crew would slide back too, where their back is almost up against the main sheet cleat. Does that make sense to you guys? Is that? And thinking about that, just remembering that, and again, that's where involving your teammate, your trimmer, to help remember that stuff, and if it can come counterintuitive when you get a puff, maybe they would just slide back on the cap up against the main sheet cleat, if we got a pretty good puff, and then they'd slide forward again when it lightened up. But I think the heel thing is actually a really big deal to make that helm neutral. Mm-hmm. I think in a Scot, that feel on the tiller is everything, because the rudder has no shape to it. It's not going to give you lift or anything like that when you're going upwind. It's just to steer the boat if you need it. So we got to be careful about putting too much load on it. Did I answer your question? Yeah. I mean, it might be, I guess you kind of have to decide if you're already up on the seat or you're already up on the deck, you might need them to move and all. Maybe you just would say, give me a little bit of lean to weather, you know what I mean? And then they can lean onto the seat or maybe come up and sit on the seat. But I think that's a team thing, but that's a style thing too. Exactly, you nailed it. And, and it's not easy, right? I mean, because it takes, and that's where going out on a day like today, okay, maybe not today, but going out and just sailing from one end of the lake to the other and getting used to it is huge, because then it becomes really natural. But I do think it's really valuable because they're going to feel the load on the sheet, and it could be, they say you can go down, and the driver might say, God, I can't go down, I'm at the mark, or I got a boat here, or whatever, or I'll go into their bad air. Then they need to know they got to let the pull forward, you know what I mean, and to feel that. So I would really work on that, But that's a good question. Yeah. Anything else on downwind stuff?
Let's get started.
Okay. We'll get started. Did everybody get this book here? We are not going to go line item by line item, I promise. But I wanted to go through some of the stuff here. And where this came from, we had a group of us that would do like a Zoom call. It started out during COVID. It was like a boys club, and it was a bunch of my good close friends, my brother. So we had like 6 of us, and we would meet every Tuesday for like 2 hours and talk sailboat racing. And you'd think, wow, that must have been a ton of fun, huh? But we could talk for 3 hours until somebody's wife would say, you guys are done. So this is a collection of all the stuff we talked about and we learned. And it was kind of cool. And every once in a while, we'd still get it out and talk about it. But what I wanted to go through are just the things I think are important. You know, going right to the pre-start here. So I highlighted my sections. It just says, compare the forecast to reality. Obviously, this is pretty much reality, and it is what the forecast said, so we know what we got. But the second thing down there, check speed with a partner of the fast boat. We talked about that. And to me, that was critical because it added a big part of the confidence that we knew where we wanted to be with our gears. We talked about the gears and all that, but until we're sort of in the battle, going alongside somebody worried about speed, it's kind of tough to know, are we set up right? So again, have somebody that's close to where you are level-wise and go upwind with them and just talk and talk and talk. You'll learn a lot. Get the downwind angles. This is before the start, obviously. How many times do we have the opportunity to go all the way up, sail up to the weather mark, you know, get an idea what side seems to be coming in more, if one side has more pressure than the other, whatever, sailing upwind. Then we round the weather mark and the offset, and we're going downwind at the gate or the leeward mark or whatever we got down there, finish line, put the spinnaker up and say, we're way high of the marks which are over here. If we know that's our game plan, when we get there, we're ready to make that initial jibe. You know, so it's just one of the pre-start preps that we're going to go through to make sure we know what's going to happen. So that's that. Get the downwind angles. Rum line. Rum line is a straight line, so we know where we are on that, and the anticipated angles. Okay, does that make sense? Everybody know what I mean? Doesn't take long, but boy, it makes a big difference. When we get back down to the starting line, practicing our accelerations, getting a good idea how long it takes to get up to speed once we hit the gas, you know. So we need to know, taking that backwards, when ideally we need to trim for that condition to get up to top speed. Because we can sit there luffing till 5 seconds, have a perfect start right at the gun, look good with everybody around us, but we're sitting there in park and they just roll right over the top of us. So just as important as having the perfect position, we got to have a runway to accelerate into. And the only way to do that is to practice it. You know, before the start, often what we do is just sail around and around and around and wait for the horn. We get set up to start and we go. But this is a good chance to really get comfortable with how long it takes to get up to speed. Check the gate position if it's set. You know, sometimes they'll have the gate, if you're sailing with the gate above the start-finish line, we can sail up to that, aim at the weather mark, right? And look and see if the gate is square or cocked. And if this end is up higher, then everything else being equal, we'd want to round that one because it's closer to the weather mark. Doesn't always work that way when we're getting down there because there's a million boats there, but this pre-race preparation will really help. This one here, review the roles with the team and who is doing what, particularly at the start. We've been talking about that already, how your teammate really contributes to all of this. And I think this is super valuable, is to talk about, okay, what I need from you, please, is the time. I need to know especially what the boat to weather is doing, because I can look underneath the boom and see the boat to leeward. you need to tell me if not only they're at speed, but when they're starting to trim in. You know, that kind of discussion. So when we're in the heat of the battle, we're at 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 15 seconds, and they say, wow, he's really going faster. He just rolled us. That's a little bit after the fact. What we want to know, they're starting to trim their main. Now they're trimming their jib. Now we know we got to hit the gas. So that communicate, and the driver can't turn around and see that because all of a sudden they're not driving the boat. But this is the practice part of it and working with that together. You'll see confirm the course, the wind observations, the wind direction. Obviously, if we can prepare and get a good idea what's going on, if we use a compass. How many of us use a compass when we're checking shifts? Good. Then you guys know when you get out there, you got to have those numbers, your starboard, your head to wind, your port, and ideally not ideally, they really need to match. So if we're on starboard and we say we get knocked and we tack on to port, we get knocked 10, we tack on to port, that's up 10. We've been there before where we get knocked 10, we tack, and that's down 10 too. Now we're really like, oh, where did we go wrong? So we do that and we do that and we do that till those numbers match. Check the boat over, the spinnaker all set. Can I tell you, I mentioned I went to these nationals, and it really was upsetting that people would round the top mark, get on the offset, start hoisting the spinnaker, and I bet every 8th spinnaker had a twist in it. Now, that happens sometimes when we put it up. If we don't pull the tack up to the pole quick enough, you know, it can get a twist. But it also can come from not checking the spinnaker before the start. How long does that take? A minute or two? But clearing that up really makes a big difference. Just one of those little things. Somebody asked, how do we keep that? Or how do we get the tack to go forward to the pole without getting hung up on the jib sheets and the skirt of the jib and all that? And I think one thing that we always felt was important when we round the top mark, we're getting ready to put the chute up. Instead of letting the jib out like you would to reach and go fast, we would keep the jib in tight. And if we were reaching on the offset, let's say, and it was too tight to put the spinnaker up and we eased it out to go fast, now we're going around the weather mark, we would trim the jib in tight so the spinnaker can go right along the backside of the jib and up to the pole. And then, as soon as it hit the pole, then we'd reach down and uncleat it. But it would allow, it almost would be like a chute to allow the spinnaker to get around the jib. Does that make sense?
Great.
Yeah.
So when do you put that pole up?
That's a style thing again, but I would say if there's an offset and we're seeing the boats ahead aren't flying their chute on the offset, I would probably hesitate because you want to be full on focused on getting around the top mark, hiking if you need to or whatever, and because you aren't going to need the pole until you're on the offset. But if the chutes are going up on the offset, then ideally you will have approached the weather mark in such a way that you gave yourself a couple boat lengths to get the pole on and get it up, you know? So I think I would try to do it before the top mark if the spinnakers are going up on the offset, you know, if it's far enough aft.
That's assuming people are in front of you.
Yes, that's true.
No, I mean.
Oh, are you meaning, like, would you,
Fairway.
okay, would you put the pole up before you hoist a chute?
Yes.
Yeah, I would for sure. Unless just all hell broke loose and you had to get the spinnaker up, you know, because boats are close behind you and you got to get away. Knowing exactly what you said, it's going to be tough to get it around the head stay. And hopefully your teammate can help push it out like a human pole, you know, and that's not easy. But so I get what you're saying. Yeah, I'm sorry. You'd ideally want to have the pole up before you hoist it. Unless, for a barroway, unless you're going to jibe. If you're going to jibe, then that would be different. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't forget to race between the windward mark and the offset. You know, you can pick up a lot of boats. So
Don't forget it,
continue
yeah.
to race, continue to race the boats.
Yeah. You're right. That's a good point. with that, that's a good point. As we round the offset, we've all been there, right? We round the offset, and all of a sudden, we are getting the chute up and we're getting squared away, and we look to leeward, and there's like 4 boats inside us, right? We have sailed high of the rum line, the straight line to the next mark, and we've given up all this distance to leeward. But even more important than that, we've given up any possibility of a jibe, right? They're controlling our race now. And really, all it takes is exactly what you're saying, is paying attention when you get to that mark, that we have an idea what we want to do. If the breeze is filling in on the facing upwind, the left side, to our right, going downwind, if we know we're just going to want to do a bear away, then maybe it's okay to protect. But if we're going to jibe, or even if we don't know for sure, it's going to be important to kind of protect that leeward quarter. So here's one thing to think about, and I apologize getting off in the weeds here a little bit. If this is the mark, we will talk about the leeward mark, the wide then tight. Well, at the offset, when we round, too often we come real close to the offset, right, as we approach it, and then we try to bear off. Well, we can't bear off real close because our boom's hanging out there. We'll hit the mark, or we can't do a bat turn, a 90-degree turn anyway. So where I'm going with this is, as we approach the offset, we come in above the offset, maybe both width or half a length, pretty far distance. So when we turn down, we're wide then tight. So we are dead downwind alongside the mark. Did I explain that okay? It's worth practicing, because if we have a boat on our hip up here and we know we probably want to jibe because they're going to be right there, last thing we want to do is go up with them. They bear off, and then they've got us hooked, if you will, so we can't jibe. So wide, then tight, so we're able to go dead downwind, and then at least we have the option. Did I explain that okay? Yeah. Oh, are you meaning, like, would you put the pole up before you hoist the chute? Yes. Yeah. I would, for sure. Unless just all hell broke loose and you had to get the spinnaker up, because boats are close behind and you got to get away. Knowing exactly what you said, it's going to be tough to get it around the headstay, and hopefully your teammate can help push it out like a human pole, and that's not easy. But so I get what you're saying. Yeah, I'm sorry. You'd ideally want to have the pole up before you hoist it. For a bear away, unless you're going to jibe. If you're going to jibe, then that would be different. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't forget to race between the windward mark and the offset. You can pick up a lot of boats.
If you don't forget it, yeah.
Continue to race the boats.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. With that, that's a good point. As we round the offset, we've all been there, right? We round the offset, and all of a sudden, we are getting the chute up and we're getting squared away, and we look to leeward, and there's like 4 boats inside us, right? We have sailed high of the rum line, the straight line to the next mark, and we've given up all this distance to leeward. But even more important than that, we've given up any possibility of a jibe, right? They're controlling our race now. And really, all it takes is exactly what you're saying, is paying attention when you get to that mark, that we have an idea what we want to do. If the breeze is filling in on the facing upwind, the left side, to our right, going downwind, if we know we're just going to want to do a bear away, then maybe it's okay to protect. But if we're going to jibe, or even if we don't know for sure, it's going to be important to kind of protect that leeward quarter. So here's one thing to think about, and I apologize getting off in the weeds here a little bit. If this is the mark, we will talk about the leeward mark, the wide then tight. Well, at the offset, when we round, too often we come real close to the offset, right, as we approach it, and then we try to bear off. Well, we can't bear off real close because our boom's hanging out there. We'll hit the mark, or we can't do a bat turn, a 90-degree turn anyway. So where I'm going with this is, as we approach the offset, we come in above the offset, maybe both width or half a length, pretty far distance. So when we turn down, we're wide than tight. So we are dead downwind alongside the mark. Did I explain that okay? It's worth practicing, because if we have a boat on our hip up here and we know we probably want to jibe because they're going to be right there, last thing we want to do is go up with them. They bear off and then they've got us hooked, if you will, so we can't jibe. So wide, then tight, so we're able to go dead downwind, and then at least we have the option. Did I explain that okay? Yeah.
You did, my way of thinking, if I'm kind of being lifted to the mark, then I'm probably going to be more likely to do a jibe set if there's not a lot of traffic coming. But there's the tendency of the spinnaker to backfill and sort of get sucked in between the jib or in the front forestay. The triangle. Is the crew supposed to kind of chunk it out, or what? Or is that where you're talking about having your jib there and make it like a chute for this?
Well, that'll help. But the first thing I want to say, Bill, is what you just described is really important. And it's hard in the heat of the battle to remember that, thinking about you're lifted going into the top mark, that's where the compass is cool. That means if we're in an up angle going to the top mark, all else equal, we're going to want to jibe. And what you just described there is important to remember. So that was great. And I think putting the spinnaker up, yeah, if the jib is trimmed in hard, it makes it a lot easier to go through without getting caught under the, especially if we got 2-to-1 sheets, there's a lot of jazz dangling down there that'll get hooked in. So pulling it in tight, it's not fast, but we're not going to do it for very long, but it'll make a big difference.
Keeping the boat from rotating is how you keep that thing from going sucked in there anyway. If it's trying to blow through the fore triangle, you've probably turned a little too much.
Right, that's a good point.
Yeah.
We've probably gone too deep, too quick, right? Yeah.
So you're thinking pull the jib sheet in tight, even on a jibe set?
Yeah, I would, and not for very long, because,
Just a second, just to make sure
get it
that
up.
yeah,
the chute wouldn't get sucked into the slot.
yeah. Or sucked in or get stuck underneath the sheets. And on a Scot, the way the skirt of the jib comes up and it's trying to go up to the pole, all of that stuff. It's not speedy for sure. All the stuff we talked about, is out the window there. But if it was ingrained in your teammate's mind, once the chute gets up to the pole, then they just uncleat the jib sheet and it goes out. Everybody's happy,
We probably
Yeah.
should get back to starting though.
Pardon me?
We probably should get back to starting.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we got onto that because there's one sentence that says, "Is your spinnaker all set?"
Yeah.
But that's good. The first beat strategy. So this is still before the start, we're talking about the weather mark is set is the leg square. Obviously, we know what we're talking about. We head up into the wind. We look at the weather mark. Is the weather mark there, or is it over here to the left? It's just telling us which side of the course might be favored, or which side of the course at that moment with the wind is going to be favored. But one thing to remember, and we're going to talk about which end of the line is favored. Do we want to start closer to that line? And just remember, once we tack once, where the weather mark is has nothing to do with where we want to start on the line, right? If it's a leeward end favored and the mark is way over here, we still want to start. I'm getting ahead of myself because later I'm going to say we'll start closer to the favored end, but not right at it. But we'd want to start closer to the favored end because that's going to give us an advantage right at the start, okay? Once we tack once, that's way more important than where the mark is on the horizon compared to the starting line. Okay, that's all I'm trying to say in about 85,000 words. Distance to the first mark, how long will you be on each tack, just so you kind of have an idea. The line favored. There's a lot of ways to check the line. Head up into the wind, get an idea, is the leeward end above or below or whatever. If you use a compass, I'm really big on heading up into the wind, get a head to wind number, running the starting line, and you kind of have to look carefully. The transom's there, bow's here. You get that number, the line, the head to wind. If it's less than 90, we know it's leeward end. If it's more than 90, we know it's weather end. But what I really like about that is not only that, that's easy as long as we have a piece of paper and a pencil, because it's hard to remember that. But it also tells us how much. Like if it's 5, 10 degrees, it's not a big difference. If it's 25, 30 degrees, now it's a big difference. Now we really have to decide if we want to go closer to the favored end. You all know what I mean by favored end? You want me to just, I'll show you that real quick. This is the pin, the boat. Race committees, ideally, like Alan this weekend, will have a perfect starting line with the wind completely perpendicular to the wind, right?
It's not here, so
Okay, good.
you missed that.
Yeah. Good luck with that, right? But the idea is for a race committee to set a line like that, and the idea is that no matter where you start on the line, port tack at the leeward end, starboard tack at the weather end, when you sail along, you'll crash into each other right above the middle of the line. I don't suggest that as a way to test it with your tuning partner, but that's the idea. Nobody has an advantage. But as we know, it's never like that. So let's say the breeze is from the right here. So his angle is up a little bit. His angle is down. That means this end of the line is favored because they won't even get close. So we want to kind of have an idea which end of the line we want to start closer towards. And I think that's the important part, is start closer to, not at the pin. Leeward end favored. Let's say it's like this. We're coming off the line, and I'm not doing a very good job here setting these up, but this boat looks great, right? Perfect start. They nail the line. They're going fast. They hit the favored end. Everything's great. But this boat's right here, so they can't tack. And that start is a waste because they can take them all the way out to the ley line. Maybe not intentionally, they just think that's smart, but they can't consolidate on the fact they had a great start. So that's why I'm big on being kind of more towards the middle, or in this situation, if it's this favored, the leeward third, so we can tack. Because we'll see later what's the definition of a good start. It's being at top speed in a position you can take advantage of the first shift. It's not that you can turn around and wave at your buddies and say, look at this, will you? But because we can't really use it if we're not in a spot we can take that first tack. Does that make sense? Really, really an important part of it. I mentioned the Thistle Nationals that I watched, and the guy that eventually won the Nationals, this Mike Ingham, started in the middle of the line no matter what end was favored. Because it was 75 boats, so it was a really long line. And if it was a leeward end favored, that boat at the leeward end had a big jump on the boat at the weather end. I mean, like 100 yards, 50 yards. But the fact that, or the chance that they could tack was pretty slim. Mike in the middle, because he was fast, could get out, tack. And maybe those boats already had him, but we know later the wind's going to shift and he's back and he could take advantage of it. And he rarely rounded worse than 10th at the first mark, which is, in my mind, a huge score in that big of a fleet. But it was very conservative. Okay. How many of us use line sights? You comfy? Okay. I'm not real good at it. We talk about teammates. I'll always have this guy that has been sailing with me for literally 30 years. We're like a couple of little old ladies. And he would help us get a line sight. But let's say this is a starting line. Let's say this is a tree over here. And we need to, well, there's a bunch of trees, but let's put this tree here. And you can get a line sight, of course, when you're on the line where you look through the mark to something on shore. And that's going to involve your teammate, right? Because the driver is going to have an impossible time lining up something maybe through the shroud, through the mark, to a tree. I mean, they don't have that time to study that. The team, your teammate, your trimmer is going to do that. But also, let's face it, when we're here and we're looking for the line sight, it's like, whoops, we're over. We can't go backwards, you know what I mean? So the line sight really is only valuable back in here, I think, so we know when we're safe. So we're gonna ideally start this maybe from 2 or 3 boat lengths below the committee boat, sailing along, eyeballing through the mark to a tree. Then we get a little closer. Now we know we're 2 lengths. We're gonna eyeball through the mark to another tree, and those will give us our safe points. And that's really valuable. So when we get to this point, we know we're not ahead of our game, ahead of our timing. So that's really valuable. Because I'd never be able to look at it as a driver, I never got comfortable with it, but this guy, Jeff, that sailed with me all the time, was a master of it. And he would be able to say, we got a length before the start at 10 seconds, and that always worked out well, as long as he was right, you know? So, any questions so far? Is this okay, you guys? Is this good what we're doing? And we'll go till we get off the starting line, then we'll take a break, and if anybody wants us to sniff around their boat and take a look at it, we're happy to do that. Okay, line favorite, check out the risk factors. I think this is kind of important. What things can go wrong that we need to be prepared for? We need to have a significant line favor. We talked about that. If we put ourselves in a spot that we can't take advantage of our position, that is, we can't tack, that's dangerous. You know, the other thing, can I just mention? We talked about being at the leeward end and not being able to tack, but also we got to remember if we start at an end like this, we're going to go left, right? I mean, we're not going to be able to tack and go right because there's going to be the fleet up to weather. We better be sure that the left side of the course is right, whether it's breeze, whether it's current, whether it's whatever it is, we better be sure this is right because at least for the first third of the race, we're on the left side of the course. And that's the other thing, like going back to this Mike Ingham that was here, he had complete run of the bottom of the course to one side or the other, knowing that there's going to be somebody that's going to shoot a corner and be ahead of him, but he never gave it up early, okay? So obviously we keep going back to being careful of being too far to an end. One side of the beat is favored. We will hopefully have an idea which side of the course is going to be favored by our pre-race preparation. One thing to do that's cool with your buddy, if you have this tuning partner, this practice training friend, is start at the middle of the line on opposite tacks and sail for like 5 minutes, and at 5 minutes tack, and see when you come back together who's ahead or who's behind. You wouldn't want to make a life's decision on that, of course, because it changes, but it might give you an idea when you get together. Was it breeze? Was it shift? What was it that gave you that advantage? It's worth checking that out. Any questions? Line length and factor of impact, how favored. Boat speed, we got to have the speed. Density. And what that means when we talk about density at the start is where the pile is. And obviously, if it's a leeward end favored or a weather end favored, there'll be more density, more boats at that part of the starting line. And again, that's going to be hard to navigate through. I don't mean like navigate, I mean just be able to handle. So we want to be careful about staying out of those piles. Because remember, the thing that's important is we got to be at the start at speed. And if we're in a group of boats, it's going to be really hard to get up to speed. They're going to be blocking our way. They're going to be blocking our wind. They might start ahead of us, hit the gas ahead of us. So we got to make sure we're in our own little area without a lot of boats. Okay, and then it says, determine the start considerations and the goals. We said this, hit the first tackable shift while minimizing risk. Focus on starting in low density areas near where you want to. That's important. Hit the first tackable shift. I should go back to that, while minimizing risk, which means we come off the line. It'd be a great time to tack, but there's a boat on our hip. Is it worth taking that risk early in the race to try to cross that one boat? Obviously, the answer is no. Why take a risk that early? If he drops down at you, take it right away, and you might say cross him when you can to consolidate that gain. That's a big part of this. If we have a chance to go through more of the tactics, the consolidation part, I think, is critical. Whenever we get a shot, we're sailing alongside another boat, we might get knocked, they might get knocked, meaning we both get headed, so they fall down into our stern. You know, we're sailing along like this, we both look even, right? Pretty even. Then we sail into a header, all of a sudden we look really good. We'd want to think about, the bells and whistles should go off. Is this a good time to consolidate? Which means tack, cross him, go up in here, and we check that box. He's out of play, meaning we've now spent a little bit of our lead to consolidate that gain. Sometimes we're sailing along, this guy is to weather here, like on our hip. We actually get a lift, he falls into a hole, you know, and sags down like that. Do we spend a lift to consolidate, gain, and get up here and control again? That's a decision to make real quick. And you might say, on a day like today where the wind's all over the place and really shifty, puffy, you might say, man, we got one, let's take it right now, because who knows what's going to happen next, you know? But those are the kind of decisions you got to look at. The greedy person would say, yeah, baby, we got a gainer here, we're going to keep going. And of course, what will happen is a big old righty will come in, and they're like that then, you know? So I think if we have good boat speed and we're able to take advantage of a lane, a position that will have clear air, it'd be good to take it when we can. That's, at least, again, this is a style thing. There are people that would say, no, we want to, when we make a gain, we want to continue pressing it so we can gain more. That's a good strategy if you're sailing big boats where there's a rating thing and you got to get every second, you know. But when we're sailing one design Flying Scots, if we can do our chest move and pick up a boat, that's really good. Any questions on that? At the start, speeding, heading straight at the line. This is one thing I want to mention. We're just a little bit ahead of ourselves. When we're getting ready to start at the line, well, first, let me back up. When we get in trouble, often it's because we've gotten to the line early. We just, for some reason, hit the gas too quick, or we're trying to protect ourselves on a boat to weather, and all of a sudden, we're close to the line, and we don't have many options to slow down. Our first idea is to bear off, to go parallel line so we're not over. One thing to think about if we have time is we can also burn speed and position by heading up into the wind and slowing the boat down. I mean, that puts us closer to the line, but with less speed. So sometimes that's the best way to keep from being over the line, is to head right up into the wind and then turn down. When we do this and turn down, and we have a boat to leeward, we end up right on top of them in their bad air. So be careful, or your teammate again is going to be helping to tell you how far off the line you are. Because if we get close to the line, we run out of options how to hit the brakes. And that's really important. And what I'm saying there is, at the start, we ideally don't want to be running down the line at a reach at top speed and then try to turn up at the gun. What do you think happens when we go from here to close hauled? Pardon me? slows down because we're making our blades turn like that and they'll stall. And it's almost like we'll do one of those slide deals because we're turning too sharp. So we don't really need to bear off on a reach to get going that fast. We just need to go to a close hauled, or really, I should say close reach, close haul. So we're just off the wind so we can be in first gear like we talked about out there. When we're in first gear, we're a little bit off the wind. We can hit the gas and get up to speed, but we're not giving up distance to leeward. That's what I was trying to say in that real long-windy way. But does that make sense? Yeah. Real important. This next one, start execution. We're getting near the end here, you guys, of what we wanted to talk about. What is your starting strategy? You know, if we were going to be able to get out there today and do practice starts, which what I had in mind we'd do today, I had some drills we were going to do if we had decent wind, but once we realized probably wasn't going to be great wind, I was thinking we'd do 2 practice starts. The third start would be a race, and we'd do these practice starts. We'd follow each one of you at different times around the race course and make comments about your boat handling, your speed, your setup, your sail trim. But the idea was I was going to ask everybody to come away that we could talk about tonight what their approach is, their standard approach. And I guess what I would love to see us work on at some point is coming up with a strategy that we use for every start. Our approach is always the same. There's a whole bunch of different approaches. There's a port tack approach, which doesn't mean starting on port. We'll talk about that. There's a starboard luffing approach, all kinds of ways to do it. But if you use the same approach, then the only variable becomes the timing. So the only thing you have to think about is how long it takes to get from point A to point B, and how far once you're at point B it is to get to the line. So anyway, that's what we're talking about here. And we'll talk about a consistent approach here in a sec. Actually, can I do it right now? Just a little bit on that. And then, and I'm going to share the approach that I like to use. And again, this is just my approach. I would suggest trying it. Some people would look at it and say, you got to be kidding, kind of thing. Or they might say it's worth a try. There's other boats that will do a starboard luffing where they'll go down the line like this and look for a hole to stick it up into. And I get nervous with that. If there's a whole bunch of boats lined up on the starting line, is there bad airs coming up, and to get through it is kind of tricky. Instead, if we have boats lined up like this, what we like to do is line up on port underneath the boats against the grain. Some people go, are you kidding me? You know, but we'll sail along like this, looking for holes to tack into. Because we know the goal of all these boats on starboard, their goal is to create a hole to leeward. And as we approach, we can tack into that hole. That tack is very slow and very controlled, so we don't come into a tack and blow through it, and all of a sudden we're sticking out in front of the whole fleet. Kind of a slow tack, and we end up tacking like that. We can talk more about that, but I guess whatever approach you are comfortable with, I would practice it, practice starts, and then do it the same way every time, because for us, if we do this port tack approach, I know I like to leave the pin area to give me enough time to sail down the line, you know, kind of on a semi-luffing kind of not full speed reach. If I want to be in the middle of the line, I've practiced to know, let's say it takes 30 seconds. So I'll leave here, giving myself enough for 30 seconds, a tack, which will take 10 seconds, and then maybe 20 seconds to the line. So I know how long those different steps are going to take, so we can start our process like that. And it's only timing. If it's blowing 20, it isn't going to take near that time. If it's blowing 2, I know we have to give ourselves a lot of time. but try to find a system that works for you and use it that way all the time. Let me see. I think we've covered enough on starting unless you guys have questions. We could take a break. We could go check out boats if you guys would like. We can answer any questions you guys have. Is anything? Any questions? Is this a good time for a break, you guys think?
Check out both.